Kali my number. Mfweni economics ya mkabumba. Ndasonkela patinshi bomba. Narina na mufya kulumba. Economics ya mkabumba. Economics ya mkabubili. Economics ya mkabumba. Economics ya mkabubili. Chela bushikumba. Crazy, pakasongirila kendo, fika bondi pa midnight, fika fitna lala, taba fundulu wa kumain house, owe osuka panya 2 rice, gabu kamuposhe good morning. Economics ya mkabomba. Economics ya mkabobili. Economics ya mkabomba. Economics ya mkabobili. Abanandi baliva na majobu. Okumfaila ko job chila shupa. Pati daily banje bafakupa. Okunzenda kubwalwa nilionze. Pati kuma business ibansha panse. Nsala isanga na mona stofu. So daily mbuka kuma 12. Avoiding a breakfast time. Economics ya mkabomba. Ya mkabomba. Ya mkabomba we. Economics ya mkabobili. Ya mkabomba. Ya mkabomba. Economics ya mkabomba. Ya mkabomba. Ya mkabomba. Economics ya mkabobili. Budget mpanga mu bantu. Ubwango kukulya kuli kantu. Ngandefu aisho kumoneka ko bwino. Kuikopa fena chiwawe. Na lasa kona chiwawe. Na posta na pafuma social. Ama likes kumona bakumayati. Ndawa mana low budget. Economics 101. Economics ya mkabomba. Efetwa ikala yama. Economics ya mkabobili. Economics ya mkabomba. Atufisha pa. Economics ya mkabobili. Chachine big money. Economics ya mkabomba. Atukusha. Economics ya mkabobili. Economics ya mkabomba. Abenge mchado tubomba na economics ya mkabomba.
G-Show Records production.
It's feeding people them ratification. Quincy Wincy, you're not cooked up again with a little spice. Better.
Good afternoon, is it good evening? Listen, now we're hey, good evening, people. Mwa senpo mkwae muributi munibwanji shan laka. Yeah, so we are back again at this, and we obviously continued to discuss inequality in Zambia. And this evening, I'm privileged to be joined by Dr. Cleopas Sambo, who will help us obviously discuss inequality broadly. We'll see how wide and broad it's going to take us. And as traditionally, we'll have him talk with us for 20 minutes. In these 20 minutes, he'll make his own presentation. And then after the 20 minutes, I'll ask him questions. And then I'll also pick questions from the people that are watching us on YouTube and on the 7 platforms, Facebook pages. So I'll be picking questions from all these spaces. And I would also like to maybe thank Center for Policy, Trade and Development, CPTD, who have allowed us, who helped us obviously broadcast from wherever I am. I'm not in Lusaka, I'm not in the Copper Belt, I'm just kumpanga fioko. So CPTD had facilitated for my connectivity, and obviously another staff. I'd like to say thank you very much for the support, CPTD, and to allow us or to facilitate for these conversations to go on. People's time. Dr. Sambo, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, so we are good to hear. Can you can go ahead with, I can say hello to the people and get into your presentation, and we will follow you.
Thank you. I think let me start by saying thank you so much to you, Pilato, for this invitation to have this conversation. It's an honor really to be able to have this conversation with you, also on the backdrop of your current album, which is addressing very crucial issues in our nation. And I think I must congratulate you for transitioning into an artist that does not just seek to empower his own pocket, but one that is concerned about the human condition. And I think posterity will remember you very well. So for today's conversation, I think I have a presentation that I want to run through, and I'll share my screen. I'm calling it inequality in my eyes, in my own eyes. So let me just, I hope technology won't fail me. Can you see?
Yes, I can. I think we all can see that. We all can see it.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about inequality in a broad sense, but also in a specific sense. In a broad sense, I want to address, I think, building on to the conversation that you had with my colleague, Dr. Grief the other week. And I think he gave us the numbers. So I want us to talk about a little bit more about the logics and the soft things that maybe we often do not think about, but are actually about inequality. So let's go. So I'm beginning from the standpoint of thinking of inequality as it's the structural result of historical processes of social, political, and cultural group dominance. Okay, so basically, what I think about it is we have dominant groups in society which control what the rest of the other groups can do, including their access to resources. Now, inequality is a question of power. Okay, it's a question of agency and it's a question of decision making. So essentially, what we are saying is inequality is inherently political and relational. What these two terms mean, if I'm sounding too academic, is that it's embedded in and reproduced by social structures, processes, and relationships. So we cannot talk about inequality without talking about power. Inequality is about power relations. It's about agency. And agency is essentially, me where I stand. Can I make decisions of my own concerning my life? Can I make decisions about the things that I value? Can I implement those decisions? Okay. Now, power as an underlying current is the ultimate determinant of whatever outcomes we come to see as tangible or material in the everyday. Okay, and so you might ask me, Cleopas, but this power, how does it manifest itself? Okay, we see it in various forms and it operates at various levels. So it can be brute force in the case of gender-based violence, that is a form of power, but it's often soft and insidious decision-making power. So we often do not see it as power, we merely just experience its effects, okay? And political and class systems, as well as the legal systems that underpin them, are often a source of this inequality. And this, I think, is sounding a bit more, higher up and a bit more broad, but I will bring it down so that we see exactly what I mean. These political, class, and legal systems shape and legitimize authority. They frame, they shape what we can call rights and their application. They shape something that's very important that I like to think about a lot, the status orders and value hierarchies of society, which in turn systematize inequality. So by systematizing it, I'm talking about making it a structured way of believing, of thinking, of acting, and of being, okay? So now somebody can ask, inequality as a structured way of believing, of thinking, of acting, and of being. Well, most of us are actually manifesting these structured ways of believing, of thinking. But these are also made real in our everyday lives through like language, the discourses that we use. So discourses talk operates as an expressive frame. Think about the song that you just played when we started. It enables us to reflect. So it gives us an imagination that can constrain or enable our action. Our symbolisms are part of these discursive structures, and so are our proverbs and our myths. And I'm going to show how this works in our Zambian context. But inequality also commodifies us. Okay? It turns us into commodities whose value can be assessed and found on the market. So, for example, our worth then becomes only that which is our market value. So, for example, when we say that we are free, Zambians as Zambians now we are free, what do we mean? Because actually our worth is our worth on the market. Okay, so for example, I am an academic, almost everything that I am and that I do is associated with that value that I've been assigned on the labor market. Okay, and the things that we deserve become only those that we can attain through our position or our status on the market. So as you can see, this undermines the principle of equality that is articulated in the preamble of our constitution. So having laid out like this broad, maybe what you could call theoretical words, what are the examples? How is this functioning in our local setting? I'll give you, I think, 4 or 5 examples. So the first one is what I call the ageism, or the discrimination based on age that is embedded in our supreme law. Okay, and in case somebody accuses me of fabricating this, I've got actual bits from the Constitution, which is our supreme law, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you. So if you look at what's on your screen right now, and I've highlighted it, says a citizen who has attained the age of 18 years is entitled to be registered as a voter and vote in an election by secret ballot. This is interesting, right? Because 18 years is 2 years after you got your NRC, right? And when you get your NRC, we say you can get a driver's license. So you can operate, a very dangerous motor vehicle, but you cannot vote. You cannot decide who should be your councillor, okay? And then you cannot even become a member of parliament when you become 18. You are allowed to vote. You can choose who is the best candidate to represent your interests, but you yourself cannot be the person who represents your interest. You have to wait until you're 21. That's quite interesting for me,
It is very interesting. It is very interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And if you look at the preamble, what I was saying is it confirms the equal worth of men and women and their right. And I'll show you how I think that all this is. See what happens. When can you become Speaker of the National Assembly? You see what it says in D. It says at least 35 years old.
35 years old. Oh,
yeah. So you qualified to vote at 18. You couldn't be an MP until you went to the age of 21, and you can't be Speaker of the National Assembly until you're 35. Okay. Now, this is the same provision that's there for becoming a president, right? Now, I want us to look. This is from the ZDHS of 2018. Okay, what is it telling us? It's telling us that Zambia's population is actually bottom heavy, right? So you can see at least 48% of us, of Zambians, are between the age of 0 and 14, while 3% is age 16 or 65 or older. Okay, look at the pyramid and where it shows where are the most people in Zambia. If you can see here, it's like between 30 from 34 coming down is where we have the most citizens, right? But what we are saying is that these citizens, despite their large numbers, right, they are not mature enough to aspire for the higher offices of our society. Okay. Jesus, when was, I think as a Christian nation, Jesus, when did he start his ministry? Around 30, right? If you read Luke, I think it's Luke 3. And when did he die? Around 33, 30, 36. So if Jesus was based in Zambia, he would have never qualified to be speaker or president of Zambia, right? And yet everybody in this country is following his radical ideas if we believe that we are a Christian nation. So why are we saying this large pool of human beings are not mature enough to aspire for these higher offices? We must just leave this. They can decide who is good enough, but they themselves are not good enough, right? So what I'm saying is, this is where it starts from, and we must think around issues like this because, okay, open it up. Let people who are 34 contest the presidency. Are we scared that they will elect one of them? Are you getting my point? Because we can't.
I am getting it clearly and loudly.
So there are these contradictions within our laws. The second example that I'm going to give is that we have essentially what I would call a Lusaka state that's steeped in political patronage and structural exclusion. Okay, so if you want to do anything meaningful in Zambia, you must come to Lusaka, right? You must travel to Lusaka. At some point, even the music studios were only in Lusaka, right? So even art, expressive art, you had to migrate to Lusaka. You want to sign some important documents and whatnot, and this note, you must travel to Lusaka. So in this very vast land, why is business only happening in Lusaka? Why must Lusaka be the center of everything? Because decisions can be made even in other areas that are outside Lusaka. But this spatial inequality that exists, it also manifests itself in terms of decision making. So we pull all the MPs, we bring them to parliament, and then they make a decision, and then half of the time they never even experience the problems that people have. So they go back at the end when their time is over. And then Zambians have generally now sort of got to a point where they know these people are not going to give us anything. So when an election comes, it's a time also for them to pay us. So give us something, salt, sugar, because we know that when you go for good. So this has become a cycle, okay, that is not ending. I have an example here from my research of a district welfare assistance committee chairperson who's explaining to me why, as a rural district, for example, they are struggling. And he says farming, on which the life of this district depends, is difficult to manage. It requires resources and good soils, but unfortunately, there's little government support to the agriculture sector. Before, people who would be poor were lazy, but now even the hardworking ones are poor because the soil does not produce more. It needs fertilizer, which we do not have, and the rainfall patterns are changing. So now you see that there's a sort of climate change is now making our inequality also worse, but also there's the political decision making which favors the center at the expense of the periphery. And this is a huge problem. It's a structural exclusion that is perpetuated by our political system. Okay. Look at this second case. We moved here when my mother-in-law became ill. My grandchildren used to go to school, but it became difficult because of my mother-in-law's illness. So they had to stop. When my mother-in-law was ill, we could not stay in town. So we came here when she passed on. Then we decided to stay and just started farming, but the fields are not giving us good yields. So these are people who, for the most part of their lives, have lived in town, and then now, because they can't survive the town life, they have to go to the rural area where they have, they're not used to this lifestyle. But then you can see an intersection here of, for example, ill health, how it's working. They're saying they didn't have enough to live in the city because health is very complicated. Now we're just having the national health insurance. But before all this, you saw that health could actually bankrupt you. When you become sick, you're paying so much. And this is what I meant when I said that inequality commodifies us, because what you're worth on the labor market is what your value is. So if you cannot pay for health, then you die. Okay. Then we have gender-based discrimination and a lack of symbolic presence among women. This one is very interesting because sometimes I think, even as a man, I have to sit down and ask myself the question, okay, what am I doing here? What's going through my mind? Those ways of believing, of thinking, of acting, and of being that I said are made real through discourses, they're also part of our cultural and emotional reservoirs. Okay? So think about gender-cultural relations and attitudes towards women. So for most of us, the frame of reference for women is as mothers, sisters, wives, auntie. But these are roles, okay? These are roles. So why are we thinking of women only in terms of their roles, not in terms of who they are, okay? So we rarely ever construct them as human beings. If you think about our cultural way of thinking, for example, the Insaka as our symbol of deliberation, of ideas, and of leadership, is one in which women are silent. Okay, even among the matrilineal ethnic groups, you will have one woman maybe who will go there as Bamama or something, but the rest of the women are silent. So we have institutionalized within our cultural setting the silence of women. Okay, the place where we make decisions, they keep quiet. Now imagine this is half the human race is not telling you what they think. And this is manifest also even in our attitudes later on. If you go to work, for example, I have a problem, people say, oh, my sister will take minutes. But this is not your sister, this is your colleague, right? She is just as you are in the workplace. So these beliefs that we have eventually seep into also our actions. And here I'm also thinking about lack of symbolic presence. When I was doing research in one of the provinces, for example, the women were telling me we can't go to the fertilizer support program because, it's very hard to sit among men to hustle for fertilizer, because these men, if you have a man in your life, things are easier because they can fight for you. Forget the fact that this is real or unreal, but it's a feeling, okay? And they inhabit this feeling. So you need a man to be safe. You need a man to be secure, and largely from other men, right? Or you need a man to get things done or to access services. So this lack of symbolic presence also creates a lack of confidence, a lack of assertiveness, which then manifests in the everyday life. Then we have unjust social arrangements, including in the everyday. The power and domination of others, which is exemplified by lack of recourse in social disputes. This exacerbates inequality, which has practical implications on material well-being. So first of all, the unjust social arrangements start from the top, from the politics itself, and then they come down. I'll give you an example again from my research. This woman tells me, we were farming here, but then our friends' animals were eating our crops. So we complained to them, this year we complained, next year we complained. So we said, it's too much. We're complaining, nothing is changing. So we just moved and we started farming here. But where we have moved to now, the soil is bad. So it's a lose-lose situation, okay? And if we go to a small, these village courts, nothing happens for us, right? So you see that this domination at the local level has real-life material effects for people. This other participant, Joseph, had arranged with somebody to come and plow their field. And he sent the grandson, I think, or the son, and the grandson, and he went and worked with them, helped them plow. And when it was time for that family to come and plow his field, they kept giving him stories until the rain season ended. That year, he harvested nothing. Okay, so these kind of distillations. So first, we look at what we can call the higher level unequal mechanisms at the political level, but they distill into the everyday life, where, for example, we have no recourse in disputes. When somebody wrongs you, you cannot take them to somewhere. The law is slow to respond, and so on. Then we have the mythologies of inequality reified as truths in an unequal economic system. Okay, I'll give you a couple. We think we can pray ourselves out of inequality and poverty. If it's God's will, God helps those who help themselves. Okay. Hard work can cure inequality. The worst of among us have a defective character. We also individualize success. The mama I made it syndrome, I call it. So what these do is, first of all, we think that if we work very hard, we can make it out of inequality. Wrong. We are locked in. We are going nowhere. You know, it's like when you get, yes, countryman, when you get a grasshopper and put it on a plate with butter, you know, it will skid and go nowhere. It will be doing a lot of work, but it's going nowhere. This is what happens even if you think, countryman, between you and I, the person who burns charcoal in Kaputa is working harder than you and I are doing, but they're not going anywhere. Okay, because they're locked in. These all systems that I spoke about, they've locked in there. And we think those who are worse than us, there's something wrong about them. You know, maybe they're not morally upright. But no, there's nothing wrong with their character. And then we individualize success. When we succeed, we forget all the low-hanging fruits that we have. So, for example, my parents were teachers. They were primary school teachers. Now somebody can say, primary school teachers. But you see, because they were primary school teachers, there was something that they were able to do about my education that my friends who didn't have teacher parents did not have access to. Okay. So now when I'm here, I'm teaching at the University of Zambia, then I say, look how well I did, how I made it. I ignore the fact that I had a background that empowered me to be able to get to where I am. Okay. And talk about my friends who did not, as they were not working hard enough, and so on. When we talk about, you know, God, this God question actually is very interesting for me, because Zambia has a 54% poverty rate, and it's a Christian nation. So if poverty is a demon, for example, what are the pastors doing in all these churches? Why haven't they cast it out of the 54% of Zambians? Are they doing, then either we agree that poverty and inequality are structural, and then we continue with the church, or we said that the church has failed because its poverty is increasing. Therefore, the demon is increasing and they are failing in their duty and we must close them. Okay. I have another example here. Beatrice tells me that her children have never been to school because she couldn't take them. You know, she didn't have money to take them. Even though you see that education is free somehow, but there are all these other things that you must do, like the distances and so on. So they were at home with her. And then she's telling me, I want to take these children to school. I know that education is good for them, but I cannot. And when people look at me, they think she's a bad parent. How can she be keeping her children at home? She doesn't know what's good for her children. So in the end, also, our discourses now become those that denigrate against people who are not making it. But all these are part of the system of inequality. I don't know how much time I've taken and if I've gone over.
I think you've gotten about 30 minutes.
Oh, so, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm done anyways, but the point I wanted to emphasize is that there are different levels of logics and of functionings that keep us locked into inequality. You know, the political system, the legal frameworks, the social and cultural arrangements, including the discourses and the mythologies that we carry, things that we believe in our heads about others and their success.
So there's a disagreement here, though. This is coming from Leroy. Leroy says, I don't agree with your statement, Sambo. Zambia is not that unequal. We still have an element of vertical progression within our defunct Zambia if you work hard.
So, again, this is the thing that I was trying to explain, right? So, look at the unemployment rate. Look at the school progression rate. If somebody starts grade 1, what are the chances that this person is going to make it through the school system, get out, go to college, go to university, and even get a job or start working for themselves? Okay, so Zambia is a highly unequal country. I think Griff was showing us the numbers last time, the Gini coefficient and so on. If you look at that number, you'll see that we are actually a very highly unequal country. But also, to make it, you must have these low-hanging fruits that I was mentioning. Okay? You must have these low-hanging. So, for example, a political decision now has taken the bursary scheme. You just get the loan, but you don't get the stipend. Okay? A person like me, for example, I would have not been able to go through UNZA because I was a 100% government-sponsored student, and I used to get the stipend. I know friends that I was with who would get the same stipend, save it, and pay for their young brothers and sisters in high school. So I disagree with Leroy on this account, because sometimes I think what we need to do is to look outside ourselves and see what is happening with others.
So this one is coming from, Muiza. This is a long text. So Muiza Zulu says, good evening, Pilato and Dr. Sambo. You said in the beginning of your presentation that inequality is largely about power. Usually the people with the fewer resources are the majority of our population, as Dr. Chelwa told us last week. In democracies like ours, this majority is the one that is in charge of putting politicians, who usually have the largest share of the resources, into office. And democracy claims to have people power. Based on this, do you think that the concept of power, I think it's not a complete post. I don't know if you could sense what she was trying to ask.
I think what she's trying to say is it's about power, and there's a very few people that are making this power. And for me, that's why I think we must start from the supreme law and how it empowers the rest of us as Zambians to participate in decision making and to also monitor those decisions. And one of the examples I mentioned is like how young people are actually locked out of these positions, right? If you remember the ageism that I talked about. So how is it that a person like me, for example, does not qualify to hold a high position in my country? All I can do is anything else. I can go and try farming, I can be a medical doctor, I can be a surgeon, I can operate on your heart, all these other things, right? So we need to distill this power from that level itself.
This one is coming from our YouTube live stream, and Ndawana Youngson asks, what interventions would you propose in the case of gender inequality and feelings of vulnerability among women to afford them assertiveness to achieve their rightful place in society?
I think one of the things that we could do, and what I've seen from my work, what is coming out of people's discussions, is access to services must be a matter of right. Okay, it should not be a matter of governmental benevolence. So, for example, if you talk about things like social security, social protection, things like cash transfers and stuff, we can afford at some point to say, we don't have money, therefore we'll not give it this year, right? Because it's still given to people as a matter of governmental benevolence. The government has felt pity for you. Something like that. But as a citizen, you must be entitled to these things. So when things become a matter of entitlement, then you can make a demand, you can lay claim. And this is where I think for me, we still need to work on our Bill of Rights, because we need to make economic, social, and cultural rights justiciable. Otherwise, we'll continue spinning in the ball of butter and going nowhere.
So, Doc, do you think equality is possible? Especially economic inequality. Do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible. I don't think it's easy, but I think it's possible. I think it's possible to reduce inequality if we take systematic action and we address these structural causes. So it's like, when you are in a house and you are right? And then there's one piece of wood that is giving very bad smoke, right? And then you tell a child, so the child keeps doing this, and that smoke is going outside the house. But you haven't removed that little piece of wood that is giving that bad smoke. So what we must do is to engage in reform from the legal systems to the political systems, and also to have a kind of conscientization amongst ourselves, to think that it's actually possible, to think that some of us are better, we are where we are because of the low-hanging fruits that our colleagues did not have, and to generate this sort of class solidarity, amongst those who have and those who do not have. But it's going to take a lot of work, because every system protects itself.
Do you think it's possible? Because I have chosen to believe that there is always somebody benefiting from inequality. There is always somebody making profits from inequality. There is the guy at the end of the puzzle or the end of the pole is benefiting. Do you think it's possible that he would or she would come to the table and say, let's be equal in how we administer resources, let's be equal in how we deal with each other, let's restructure our systems so that we can promote equality? Do you think that's possible from somebody who is benefiting from the status?
Yeah, I think it's possible, but I think, we cannot make inequality a matter of goodwill. You know what I mean, countryman? It's like, if you think that, the guy who's controlling all this is just one day going to wake up and think, I must give these guys a share. It's never going to happen. It's a matter of demand. It's a matter that we must take, right? And taking begins at the point of the kind of entitlements that we have. So, for example, if we're not entitled to social services, think generally, even just as on the everyday life. For example, if you go to ShopRite and you buy a bag of meal, right, and you take it home and you find that it has maggots in it, what would you do? You take it back. You said, I gave you money for this, so you owe me this. And that's what entitlements do, right? But then we also have, for example, as a teacher, I see my role as engaging with the learner to help the learner understand that what's the role of, for example, of government in enterprise? What must it do? What's the role of capital in a state? What must it do? And what's the role of a citizen in a state? Okay? Because if we live as citizens, but our relationship with power, with political power, is one of benevolence, then it can happen. So there is also those levels of discursive structures, the words that we use every day when we talk to each other, and how we symbolize in our minds, how we think about governance. it needs to change as well, because if you think that the government is doing you a favor, can you make a demand on the government? You cannot.
No.
Yeah.
Valentine says, I think Valentine K says, I think we should not also override the fact that there is need for reinforced solidarity among our women. I think that's a thought. I don't know if you have would you want to respond to that thought?
I think it's difficult to to respond because the context is very brief. But if you look at the things that I mentioned about the gendered relations that we have, these are structural, right? And some of them are based in our legal provisions. Some of them are based in our ways of believing as a society and as a people. I'm not saying my culture is bad. I'm saying that there are certain things that we can make better, right? So I think to individualize a structural problem and make it a problem of solidarity among women, right, instead of a problem of our society. Why do we think of women this way? We are shifting the problem when we're taking away the responsibility, for example, from men. If we talk about the security of women, look at the Zambia demographic health survey and see, the violence that women are experiencing. Most of it is coming from, almost all of it is coming from men. So the problem, I think, for me then says, we must be part of the solution, and we cannot individualize these problems, scrape around it and pass it back to the women.
So, Doc, when you say it's a structural problem, I'm beginning to think, what is my responsibility as an individual who doesn't have enough power to influence or change the structure that exists? What is my individual responsibility? If somebody who's watching us and asking, if it's structural and I don't have power to influence or change or alter the structures, I'm just a single element in this whole big picture. What would be your recommendation? Like, what should I do? Or is there anything I can do to effect change when the mess is not because of me, but because of what exists outside me?
I think there are many things that we can do. It starts at the personal, when we refuse to take injustice lying down. Part of the problem has been that we can see an injustice occurring, and because it doesn't affect us directly, we say, you sort it out on his own. So part of it is this cross solidarity as citizens, to think that actually these problems, they may not affect me today, but they will eventually affect me. So like Dr. Taylor said last week, was it on Friday, he said, if we don't resolve inequality today, it's likely that the ones who will suffer it next are going to be our children. Think about this, countrymen. If today you're okay, you can take your child to a private school, right? And so you don't care about the deplorable conditions of the public schools. What happens if by the stroke of chance you die and your relatives' property grab the stuff that you have? What happens to your child? Then your child comes into one of us. So what you must do then is think about the future and the cyclical effects of this inequality on society. And then there are things like what you're already doing, right? If I've been following, for example, the 30 million grant, it came out of Voice, right? And Voice is the one thing that we must exercise at every point. I was telling a friend the other day that one thing that the MMD government, the greatest disservice that they did to us is to keep us illiterate and uneducated in 20 years. Our literacy level was so low that our levels of consciousness became extremely low. So we must raise the levels of consciousness to be able to create voice, so that we just don't have voice, but also we can have something to say.
Mumba Lorraine Kanyanta shares a thought. She says, we need to abolish the idea of harnessing masculinity. Women need to be awarded the same or more opportunities as men. Do you want to look at that again?
I mean, I agree in principle with the idea that men and women are equal. And therefore, the opportunities that are open to men must be open to women. If you qualify for a position, why must you not have it? So, I don't know what harnessing masculinity in this case means. And so I'm a bit unsure how to respond. But if the principle is that we must generate a society in which girl children can grow without needing a brother. Here's a funny anecdote, countryman. So a friend of mine was telling me he prefers to have a first child, a son, and not a girl. And I asked him why. He said, because I feel like my son is going to protect the little sister. I asked him, protect her from what? Okay. So this is how we think, right? What we should be worried about is that the little girl is growing up in a society where she needs protection from her brother, not growing sons so that they can protect the little girls. So if we think about the problem that way, then we are chasing its tail instead of dealing with it.
Oh, that's a very unique perspective. I have never thought about it in that way. Jacob D. Sichone says, structural reforms are very urgent in Zambia. The current structural arrangements are one of the major drivers of inequality. It's unsustainable. Thanks, Pilato and Dr. Sambo, for the conversation.
Thank you too.
Yeah. Let me see if I can pick another question. So this one is Twalumba Kelvin Mwaka, who says, the problem is that women have been indoctrinated with the notion of being less equal to men. This black myth, if not worked out, will forever make women feel inferior. Inequality kills all hardworking in all dimensions.
I think it's true. Inequality robs us of the potential. Yeah, I think it does. It does kill us of all potential. What I don't know is, and what I would like to ask to Alumba is, who's been doing the indoctrination? You know, I agree with the rest of everything that he says, but who is doing the indoctrination? If we can identify who is the indoctrinator in this case, then we can resolve the problem. Because oftentimes I find that the way we frame, so in policy studies, we do this thing about policy framing as well. So the words that we use to identify the problems also tell us how or what we think is the problem in that issue. So when we say women have been indoctrinated, by who? Who's doing the indoctrination? Because we are society, we are the ones who are indoctrinated. So we must begin the change. Then the indoctrinating will stop, right?
So this one is a little unique. This is coming from Chabushiku Jim Julius. Chabushiku says, kindly comment on taxation structures and subsidies and their relationship with inequality levels.
Yeah, I think I can draw on Dr. Chera's presentation last week. So one of the ways that one of the systems that is sustaining inequality in Zambia is the wage structure. Okay. So if for example you go to the UK, you go to Scandinavian countries, you'll find that the amount of money that you pay as tax, pay as you earn in Zambia, is almost equivalent to the amount of money that you pay there as pay as you earn. What about the purchasing value of the kwacha. Okay. So, for example, I'm okay paying a lot of payee if when I get sick, I can walk into a hospital and I will be given treatment and medicine, and I'll go back home. Zambia, for example, is one of the few countries in the world without a public transport system, right? So you must have a car or, get on private buses. I'll be okay to pay high payee, if I can get power, I can get water, I can get all these things in my house. But if I'm paying so much payee and there's no social service provision, it means that the little amount of money that I'm getting then has to service these other bills, right? But payee is meant to fund these type of programs so that in the end, whatever remains in my pocket, I have a bit of room to spend, to take a little holiday for my family, and so on and so forth. So one of the things is the wage structure. And second, we have bad jobs in Zambia. So it's not enough to be employed. You must be employed well. We were talking the other day about the COVID response. So we have jobs which only sustain you to come back tomorrow to work, right? So you get your salary so that next month again you are essentially just working for the paycheck. These are bad jobs, okay? And then on top of that, you have a very bad wage structure. So we have depressingly low incomes and then high taxes. So we must find a way to reduce taxes. If you read about how much taxes corporates are paying, how much taxes mines are paying, then you begin to see where the problem is, right? Because you can't have the nation surviving on payee. And then we must broaden our tax structure as well, because 90% of Zambia is an informal economy, right? Wow. So it means either you pay payee or you pay high VAT. So our tax system is defunct. In other words, it needs to be reformed.
There's an interesting thought from Malungu Watson. So Malungu says, the solution to inequality is to abolish this capitalism state and substitute it with socialism. What's your thought on that?
I think that at the expense of sounding Marxist, what we must do also is look at the evidence, right? So we have countries that have implemented some kind of democratic socialism. Or China, for example, that we always complain about in Zambia, is implementing some kind of state capitalism, right? So how is it that a Chinese company, which is owned by the government, is able to come here and make money and take that money back to China? Where is the Zambian government's company that is making money? Right?
For the government in Zambia.
Yes, because the Zambian, what we hear about Zambian government companies is just losses, right? So we must think also about both ownership of these, the means of production, but also the management of this. So I always argue with people that, you see, the problem, for example, with state-owned corporations is never that they are incapable of producing profit. It's always that there's political interference in the running of these state-owned corporations. Why is the Norwegian pension fund so rich? Why haven't they stolen all the money from the pension fund? So I think these are some of the questions that we must wrestle.
Yeah. This one is coming from Angie Styles. Angie Styles says, capitalism is a beast here, which we should fight against. All the problems we see are structural because capitalism can only thrive by creating crisis. Power lies in our hands to change the system. I would be so happy if I see a capitalist to come and defend capitalism. So your take on that?
It's really hard, because half the time these isms, they operate as abstract and absolutes. But in real life, I think that they don't operate in the way that we think about them. But like just the example that I gave of where you have state-sponsored capitalism, which is working within a social democratic nation, you know. So we must specify as well what we mean by capitalism in this particular sense. But I think, for example, the example of the pension fund that I've given is it's working for Norwegians. It's creating the kind of society that they want. So as Dr. Taylor said, we must come to a consensus and ask ourselves, as a people, as Zambia, what are we thinking Zambia should be in the next 5 to 10 years? What are we thinking Zambia should be in the next 30 years? Right? Because right now, I don't know what our plan is. I mean, we have Vision 2030, but when I read it, I don't get an idea. When I look at what's happening, I don't get an idea. There's no conscious decision of where we want to be. Like saying something like we want to be a middle-income country by the year 2020, like it's so vague, right?
Yeah. I think I've had a chance to look at our is it, what do you call that, Vision 2030 document, and it's just a statement and no strategy how you're gonna get to where you want to get. It's just, very, very vague, I think. So this one is coming from Bwadia Kapambwe. Inequality on so many levels is through the roof in Zambia. How then do we begin to change structurally, especially with regards to our cultural way of life?
I mean, reform is hard, but and I don't want people to take me wrong to think that we must throw away our culture. But one of the things is we must be able to get to a place where we can introspect and ask ourselves which parts of our culture are helping us and which parts of our culture are unhelpful. And that's not a conversation that I can run through now and say these are the parts that we want. I was just giving an example of how, for example, we have made leadership something that only men can do, or the confidence to demand, to desire is something that only men must have. But it takes a conversation which some of us might not be happy to have. But it also takes a conversation in homes, right? Because children come from homes. And as I was giving you an example of my friend, so if my friend who's very educated tells me that he wants a son because of this and this and this, what is he going to tell his son? What is he going to tell his daughter? So I think that these conversations must start in the household. They must start here as we're doing. They must happen in the classrooms. They must happen in the churches. Because I think the churches also play a critical role, especially here in Zambia. There must also be role models. I was talking today with students earlier that look around in the department where you are learning. How many of your teachers, for example, are female? How many are male? And what does this do in the imagination of the students about what is possible for them in their lives, right? So if you have a department which only has males, like for a long time in Zambia, we used to have this theory, that engineering can only be done by males. And so you'd find there's, 15 boys and only one girl, and they even, they'll start formulating things like denigrative things like engineer's choice, when so all these things are part of the way we speak, the symbols, the values that we hold dear. All these things must be interrogated. Nothing must be sacred.
So here is an interesting thought from Cleopas Sambo. Cleopas says, from my own understanding, for someone to be in power, it means there is someone who should be a subject. Because there can't be leaders without followers, don't you think, Doc? That is, we have inequality so that we keep sustaining political leadership as a community.
I think I understand what Cleopas is trying to get at, but I also respectfully disagree with Cleopas. You see, political leadership is a fiduciary. It's like you are only a first among equals, right? You are not there because you because you're superior to us in another way. We've decided to put you there, and that's why we change. We can put somebody else tomorrow. Part of the problem, in my view, is in our imagination. We think we have exported familial type of relationships into political leadership, right? So if I come to work, I'm telling my colleague who's older than me, you are my father, right? Already that alters the relationship that I have with this colleague. Because now the way I relate with my supervisor at work and the way I relate with my father are supposed to be completely different. But when I import my familial system of leadership into my workplace, then I start creating uncles there. I start creating fathers and mothers. And what that does, my analysis of the familial system is one of its biggest problems is the lack of accountability, right? Because it's very hard to go and stand up to your father and say, here you should not do, unless you have a very good relationship with your father. So if you transfer that into political leadership, you start making your MP your father, right? And then how will you go and tell the MP that, oh, this thing that you did here is wrong. CDF was supposed to be used for ABCD, not what you have done. Okay? So we have generated a system that emphasizes respect at the expense of accountability. So political leadership is not a subject governed relationship. You have essentially a first among equals. Okay. The power is with us. That's why we give it to you and then we take it back. And everybody must understand this. From the governed to the governed, the governance. This is what I think about it.
So, Doc, I think we're coming to the end of the program. Let me just get one more question, then I'll ask you to conclude. So there is one from Felicity Kalunga. Felicity is asking, what are your thoughts on the COVID-19 measures that have been implemented in relation to widening or closing the poverty gap? What would an equally based public health policy look like?
This is a very interesting one from Felicity. One of the things I think the myths that I should have added there is the myth of the COVID messaging, which says we're in this together, right? We're not. We're not. So we're not in this together because the structural effects of COVID are very different depending on where you are in the market. That system, market system, the commodification that I was talking about. So one of the things that we must have done to make it equal is, for example, the bailout package that we had, the 8 billion budget. It did not account for informal sector workers, for example. Okay? We needed to expand social protection mechanisms to cover vulnerable households. So we already have work that's being done by the Ministry of Community Development, but it's not enough, it's insufficient. Because one of the things we must understand is that if one family does not have sustenance in Zambia, it means 6, 7 other families don't have sustenance. So a public health approach that would have been more equal would have focused, first of all, on expanding the social protection mechanisms to cover more households, on thinking about covering informal sector workers. Because, for example, how do you tell somebody who works in a market on a day-to-day basis and you tell them, no, stay at home and distance? like, I stay at home and eat what, right? So what are the support mechanisms that have been put in place for this? And we needed these to be put in place. You can't tell a hungry person to be physical distancing. So we needed support for this. We need a stimulus package for this. But also we need a less confusing messaging, right? If you tell us that we must stay at home, we must see that everybody is staying at home. Right? You don't tell me to stay at home and then I see you on the street doing things. It confuses me because then I start to think, what is going on here? Am I staying at home because there's money out there that I can make, right? So I think,
yeah, that's the last question we got. Okay, probably I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say in conclusion. So we close. I think we've clocked an hour already.
yeah. Okay, no, I think in conclusion, all I can say is inequality is not something that happens up there only. It happens also in the everyday. It happens in our homes. It happens when we treat, when we think about boy children as different from girl children. It happens when we think that people living with disabilities are naturally, less human than those who don't have disabilities. So we must attack it at all these levels. And what I think I'd like to emphasize is that there must be no sacred cow when we're dealing with inequality. Every conversation must be had. And it's going to be difficult because inequality is about power and everybody protects their own power. So to dismantle these constellations of power within society, within our political system, is going to be hard. But if we don't, they're just going to become worse.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc. That was very inspiring, and obviously assurance that people will have to stand up and demand for equality. So that's the end of today's episode, today's edition of Hill Conversations. And next week I'll be hosting somebody from an interesting community. So we've built our communities, our cities, to respond to the traditional, I don't know, like to a discriminative fashion. So next week I'll be speaking to somebody from a very interesting community, and I would have loved to introduce them now, but I would like the mystery to continue. So then on Monday, join me and see who I'll be bringing to the table. So for discussions. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much, Doc, for coming through, and see you on Monday.
Thank you for having me.